Elina, a 26-year-old woman living on a farm with her husband George in Oregon, USA, had always had a profound love for animals. Her connection to animals began during her childhood on her parents' farm, where she learned the importance of compassion and care. The loss of her beloved pet bunny as a child left a lasting impression on her, strengthening her commitment to animals. She promised herself to protect and care for all living creatures, helping her family with the farm animals and nurturing her natural sense of empathy. This early connection to animals led Elina to farm life as an adult. Now, with a family of her own, she dedicated herself to ensuring that all the animals on her land, cows, pigs, chickens, and horses, were well cared for. In addition to caring for her young son and supporting George, Elina's daily routine often included wandering through her farm to check on the animals. On quiet days, she would even take the horses for a walk, finding solace in their gentle presence. One quiet afternoon, while taking her usual walk around the farm, Elina heard faint, unfamiliar sounds. She paused, listening closely, and realized the noises weren't coming from her property. Intrigued, she followed the sounds toward an old, abandoned building just beyond her land. The building had stood empty for years, and she had assumed it was completely deserted. However, as she approached, a strong, offensive smell hit her, almost making her stop in her tracks. The stench was overpowering, but her curiosity and concern for what or who might be inside compelled her to continue. Stepping cautiously through the open doorway, Elina was met with a sight that broke her heart. Tied to iron bars inside the filthy building were several horses, all in a horrifying state of starvation. Their bones jutted out beneath their skin, and their coats were dirty and unkempt. Most of them were young foals, weak and barely able to stand. Their eyes reflected fear and exhaustion, and it was evident they had been left there, abandoned to their fate. It was a scene of cruelty and neglect that shook her to her core. Elina acted quickly. She took photos of the horses and immediately called animal control, describing the dire situation. Within minutes, animal control officers arrived, and they carefully approached the horses, working gently to free them from the iron bars. Elina stayed by, watching anxiously as each horse was led outside, feeling a mixture of relief and heartbreak. She had never witnessed animals in such a desperate condition and silently prayed that each one would survive the ordeal. As the rescue continued, something extraordinary happened that moved Elina to tears. One of the youngest horses, a small foal who could barely stand, gathered enough strength to walk toward her. It rested its head on her shoulder as if to thank her, nuzzling her gently. Elina hugged the foal, feeling its gratitude in that tender moment, and tears streamed down her face. She had simply followed her instincts and sense of compassion, but this small creature's gesture left her overwhelmed. After all the horses were safely removed from the building, animal control prepared them for transport to a rehabilitation center where they would receive the medical care and nutrition they needed. Before they left, Elina approached each horse, whispering kind words, and they responded with soft neighs, as if understanding she was their rescuer. Walking back to her farm, Elina reflected on the events of the day, feeling grateful for the chance to have intervened in these animals' lives. She realized that had she not investigated the sounds, the horses might have continued to suffer in silence. Weeks later, the story of the rescue reached the local news, highlighting the need for new homes for the horses once they recovered. Deeply moved, Elina and George decided to adopt two of the foals. She welcomed them to her farm, nurturing them back to health with love and care, watching as they grew stronger each day. Elina's dedication inspired other animal lovers in the community to step forward, and soon each horse found a caring new home. Today, the rescued horses are thriving, with some even becoming parents. Thanks to Elina's compassion and quick actions, the horses were given a second chance at life. The experience strengthened Elina's commitment to protecting animals and showed her that even small acts of kindness can create ripples of hope and healing. Her story serves as a reminder of the impact one person can make when they choose to act with compassion and courage. One afternoon, while walking around her farm, Elina heard strange sounds coming from a rundown building nearby. At first, she assumed the noise came from her property, but as she listened more closely, she realized it was coming from the abandoned building just beyond her land. Intrigued and concerned, Elina decided to investigate. The building had been deserted for years, and she never imagined anything or anyone would be inside. As she approached, a foul stench grew stronger, nearly overpowering her. The smell was enough to make her stomach churn, but her curiosity and concern kept her moving forward. The sounds grew louder as she got closer, convincing her that something was definitely inside. She resolved to check it out and call the authorities if anything seemed amiss. As Elina carefully pushed open the half-open door, she braced herself, thinking she might encounter squatters or perhaps a group of teenagers using the space. But nothing could have prepared her for what she found. Her eyes fell upon a sight that sent a chill down her spine and left her heart aching. Inside the dark, filthy space were several horses, tied tightly to iron bars and left to suffer. They were emaciated and weak, their coats matted with dirt, and their ribs clearly visible through their thin skin. Some of the horses were foals, barely able to stand, while the older ones looked just as fragile. The desperate creatures seemed to have been abandoned for a long time, with no access to food or water. Elina's heart broke at the sight. She couldn't fathom how anyone could be so cruel and heartless as to leave these animals to starve and waste away. Without wasting another moment, she took out her phone and snapped several pictures, her hands shaking with anger and sadness. She immediately dialed animal control, urgently explaining the horrific conditions in the building. She knew the horses didn't have much time. Within minutes, animal control arrived, responding swiftly to her call. As they entered the building, they too were taken aback by the pitiful state of the horses. The team carefully untied each animal from the iron bars, moving slowly and gently to avoid startling them further. Some horses were so weak they could hardly move, but the team worked with patience, one horse at a time, ensuring each one received the care it needed. Elina stayed by their side, determined to see the rescue through. Her heart went out to the fragile animals, and she feared some might not survive. She had never encountered animals in such desperate conditions and could barely hold back tears as she watched the rescue unfold. Just as the last horse was being let out, something unexpected happened that left her overwhelmed with emotion. A young foal, shaky on its legs and clearly exhausted, gathered enough strength to slowly approach her. The little horse nuzzled into Elina's shoulder, resting its head gently against her. In that quiet moment, she felt a connection and gratitude that words couldn't describe. She hugged the foal back, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the small creature's show of trust and affection. It was as if the horse understood that she had saved its life. Once all the horses were safely outside and loaded for transport to the animal control facility, Elina said her goodbyes. Some of the horses even leaned toward her, giving soft neighs as if to thank her one last time. It was a moment she would never forget. She felt an incredible sense of relief, knowing they were on their way to safety and a new beginning. Walking home, Elina couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if she hadn't followed the sounds that day. The horses' cries had been their saving grace, and her compassion had led her to them in time. The story soon reached local news, and it wasn't long before the rescued horses were ready for adoption. Moved by the experience, Elina decided to adopt 2 of the foals herself. She welcomed them to her farm with open arms, caring for them with all the love she could offer. Over time, they regained their strength and spirit, thriving under her care. The other horses also found loving homes with nearby families, each one given a second chance thanks to Elina's compassion. That experience strengthened her belief in the power of kindness and empathy. Her actions not only saved lives but also reminded her of the importance of listening to our instincts and helping whenever we can. Elina's simple decision to investigate that abandoned building changed many lives, creating a story of rescue, resilience, and the enduring bond between humans and animals. Inside the dilapidated building, Elina found herself staring at a sight so heartbreaking that she could barely breathe. 10 horses were tied to rusted iron bars, left to starve in conditions so squalid that it was hard to believe any living creature could survive there. Most of the horses were young foals, their fragile ribs visible under skin stretched tight. Some older horses were there too, equally malnourished and marked with deep injuries, their eyes hollow from weeks of neglect. A few were so weak they couldn't stand. Others lay limp-lie on the cold floor, their breathing faint. The cruel reality of their situation began to dawn on Elina. These horses were part of an illegal animal trafficking ring. As she processed the horrific scene, Elina's hands trembled. She quickly pulled out her phone, snapping pictures to document the condition of the animals, determined to make sure help would be on its way. Her heart ached as she thought about the cruelty involved. The traffickers cared only about profit, leaving behind any horse that didn't meet their standards, those too young, too weak, or injured. These animals, treated as mere commodities, were abandoned to die in this forgotten place. It was a sight that shattered Elina's spirit, but she knew she couldn't let these horses suffer any longer. Without hesitation, she called animal control, describing the situation with a voice thick with urgency. She also reached out to the local authorities, hoping they could aid in the rescue. Within minutes, animal control and local officers arrived at the rundown building. Elina led them inside, where the sight of the emaciated horses moved everyone to action. The animal control team, experienced yet visibly affected by the scene, began their work carefully. They untied each horse, moving gently to avoid causing further distress to the frightened animals. Some horses could barely move and required assistance just to stand. One by one, they were released from their bindings and led outside to await transportation to a nearby rehabilitation center. Elina stayed close, lending a comforting presence as the horses were freed, her eyes scanning each horse, hoping they would find peace and healing after this ordeal. Throughout the rescue, Elina's heart remained heavy with worry. She couldn't shake the fear that some of these horses might be too weak to survive. Their condition was dire. She had never seen animals so gaunt, their bones protruding sharply, eyes dull with despair. The brutality they had endured seemed to cling to the air around them, a reminder of the suffering inflicted on these gentle creatures. Elina felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility and hoped that her intervention had come in time to save them. Then, as the last horse was being prepared for transport, something happened that left everyone speechless and brought tears to Elina's eyes. One of the youngest foals, frail and barely able to walk, lifted itself up on shaky legs and took small, tentative steps toward her. The little horse approached Elina with an innocence that belied the trauma it had endured, resting its small, bony head gently against her shoulder in a quiet, heartfelt gesture of gratitude. In that tender moment, it was as if the foal understood that Elina had come to save it and its companions. She knelt beside it, wrapping her arms around its thin neck, feeling its warmth despite its fragility. The foal nuzzled her gently, its tiny breath warm against her face, and Elina felt tears stream down her cheeks. The bond was instant, profound, and unspoken. She'd whispered words of reassurance to the little horse, promising it a brighter future. That one simple hug from the foal became a symbol of resilience and hope, filling Elina with a renewed sense of purpose. The other horses, observing the interaction, seemed to respond with subtle signs of recognition. A few neighed softly as if in gratitude, while others leaned gently into the animal control officers, their stiff bodies relaxing, sensing that they were finally safe. It was as though they understood the kindness extended to them and were offering their thanks in return. With all the horses safely loaded for transport to the rehabilitation center, Elina took a moment to say goodbye to each one. She patted their heads, feeling the weight of their ordeal settle over her, yet relieved to know they were now in safe hands. The memory of the young foal's hug stayed with her, a reminder of the resilience and courage these animals displayed, even in the face of such unimaginable hardship. Walking back to her farm, Elina reflected on how the sounds she'd heard that day had been the horses' cries for help. If not for their calls and her decision to investigate, they might have been left in that desolate building, abandoned to a grim fate. The experience left her forever changed, her bond with animals deepened by the understanding that they too expressed gratitude and love. A few weeks later, Elina saw the story on the local news. Animal control announced that the rescued horses would soon be ready for adoption, needing homes where they could receive the love and care they deserved. She knew what she had to do. With a sense of determination, she decided to adopt the young foal who had shown her such gratitude. Bringing it to her farm, she offered it a new life, one filled with warmth, care, and all the compassion she could provide. She nurtured the foal back to health, watching it grow stronger each day, its spirit and energy slowly returning. In time, all 10 rescued horses found loving homes, thanks to Elina's compassionate response to their cries for help. By listening to her heart, she had not only saved their lives but also fulfilled her lifelong commitment to aiding animals in need. During the rescue, Elina held a tiny, trembling foal that clung to her, nuzzling her with gentle gratitude. Her tears flowed as the other horses approached, offering soft neighs and affectionate nudges as if to thank her. Walking home, she felt a deep sense of purpose, realizing that if she hadn't heard their cries, the horses might have been lost. Inspired by her story, others adopted the remaining horses, and soon each one had a safe, caring home. Over time, they regained their health, some even becoming parents, a testament to resilience and new beginnings. Today, these horses live happily, thriving thanks to Elina's kindness and instinct to act. Her story is a powerful reminder that small acts of kindness can transform lives and that sometimes, simply following one's instincts leads us exactly where we're needed most.